Hi, I'm That Ear Guy, and welcome to another GameHEART review. Cultist Simulator provides a unique board/card game experience. The single board provides all of the actions that you can complete, and the resources that you have to complete them. There are a few goals in the game, but the major goals involve growing your cult and completing rituals to become immortal. Playing with power is sure to be dangerous and attract attention from the Suppression Bureau, an organisation that silence and arrest those who would practice in the unseen arts of the occult. Every action that you complete in Cultist Simulator will involve dragging a card onto a tile on the board. These tiles are referred to as verbs, as they represent what you are able to do in the game. Verbs can have one or more slots to place cards in, depending on the action that you will be performing. Once you place a card in a verb slot, you can run this action, which will cause an event to take place. When playing for the first time, these events will start simple, but as the game progresses, many events will have multiple phases requiring additional resources in order to complete successfully. Resources can be anything in-game: money, items, locations, followers, and even emotions like dread or contentment. Some resources are time limited, that is, they expire after a certain amount of time. This is a good thing when a resource is bad, but it can make things a lot tougher when it is a resource that you require. Some of the most important resources are your three primary statistics: reason, passion, and health. Each of these have different purposes, but all of them are important on your journey to become immortal. These stat resources are represented by cards just like all other resources in the game, and can be used in order to complete certain actions throughout the use of the aforementioned verbs. There are a few main verbs with which you will interact throughout most of the game. Work, which is normally the way that you will earn money, but can also be used to conduct rituals for your cult. Study. This can be used to study occult texts and increase your character stats. Dream. Dreaming with each of the primary stats provides different results. Explore, which allows you to visit various locations by using location cards in the slot. And Talk. You can interact with your cult, followers, and even talk with the general public about the unseen arts. In addition to being investigated by the Suppression Bureau and being endangered by the occult's power, you need to be kept in good health and maintain your sanity. There's a verb called Time Passes, which requires one fund to succeed. The slot that takes the funds is known as a magnet slot, which will automatically take the required resource from the board. These magnet slots can be both a blessing and a curse. As the magnet slots take resources from the board, or even another slot, as soon as it becomes available, it can forcibly take a resource that you needed in order to complete another action. On the other hand, the magnet slots automatically take passive resources for you, which saves some manual handling, of which there is already a lot to do. When the Time Passes verb is resolved, it will advance what is known as a season, which is essentially a temporary verb. These seasons will test your resolve, which usually involves a magnet slot taking negative resources such as dread. If too much builds up, you will lose, and this will end the game. In order to successfully resolve a season, you will need to keep the negative resources down and generate positive resources to counteract them when required. In addition to creating a season, if you don't have enough money to fulfill the Time Passes verb, your character may get sick or starve. This means that another temporary verb will be created with a magnet slot that will steal 1 health from anywhere on the board. If you don't have enough health to pay up, a countdown timer will start, and if this timer is not met with the required resource, you guessed it, it's game over. All of this probably sounds a little confusing at this point in time, so I'll do a quick recap. All resources in the game appear as cards, and these include your stats. Some resources are time limited, disappearing or turning into a new resource once expired. In order to complete actions, you place cards on action tiles known as verbs. And time passes, requiring you to have sufficient resources to stay alive. You are able to run every verb at the same time. This means you can study, work, dream, and explore all at the same time if you want. Verbs are completely independent, so studying won't impact your exploring, for example, but that doesn't mean there is no connection between them at all. You may need funds to explore a location, so you'll need to work to earn those funds. Cultist Simulator hinges on exchanges like these. In order to progress, you will be creating detrimental resources, so it's a game of risk and reward with careful resource management. Something that really sets Cultist Simulator apart is how the board is organised, or rather, how it isn't. Every single resource and verb in Cultist Simulator can be dragged and placed wherever you would like. This means that you can arrange the entire table in whichever way suits, and the way that one player organises their table will be completely different from the next. When launching the game, a message appears saying, "Explore, take risks, you won't always know what to do next. Keep experimenting and you'll master it." This message perfectly sums up the experience that most players will have with Cultist Simulator if they are playing without guidance. The game does start with only one or two verbs active to ease the player into how to play, but from there, resolving an action unlocks a new verb and then another until all are available. Other than starting the game with a few available actions, there really isn't a tutorial or any sort of guidance on how to play. The game does communicate what options you have very well, however. For example, if you click on a verb and then click on an empty slot, it will highlight all of the cards that can be inserted into that slot. Or, if you get a new card and are not sure how it can be used, you can click and hold the new card, and the verbs where it can be placed will also be highlighted. Whether a card can be inserted into a slot depends entirely on its properties. For example, as you progress through the game, you will discover fragments of lore regarding one cult or another. These lore fragments have an aspect which ties it to a specific cult, but it's not just lore that has these aspects. Dread has 2 edge aspect, for example, and you will notice that the other resources all have their own aspects too. The primary stats all have the ability aspect, which is what allows them to be placed in the various starting verbs. When clicking on a resource, you will be able to see which aspects it has, which can allow you to learn why certain cards can be slotted into certain places and why others cannot. With all of this in mind, there are times when cards have valid aspects to be inserted into specific slots, but after the action has resolved, will result in nothing happening. Other times you will be able to place a resource onto a verb, but you won't be able to start an action with it, and won't be told exactly why. When opening a verb and placing a card, the flavour text will change, which oftentimes provides clues as to what the result will be, or what aspect would be required in the other slots. But these are not always super clear, as I found that some combinations of valid cards results in generic text as though you have placed nothing in the slots at all. This can create frustration at times, as the game does recommend experimenting, but there are a lot of actions that provide absolutely no result, and I imagine that you could play for well over 20 hours without discovering all of the possible valid combinations that result in something happening. These small frustrations are perhaps a price to pay for a game that allows so much freedom and so many options. Cultist Simulator is fun to play, despite the general gameplay being as simple as dragging cards to open slots. The resulting discovery and challenge involved made me want to keep playing for a long time. You'll also notice yourself getting better and learning more about the game as you play. In my first hour of game time, I probably failed more times than in my last 10. With that in mind, when I was new to the game, I didn't mind a death, as the game is quick to restart and I could get back to it again. After I'd gained some experience though, there was a large checklist of things I wanted to do before I started working toward a victory. Increase my primary stats as high as possible, purchase all of the books from the store, study all of those books to gain lore, and start a cult and gain some followers. Realistically, a lot of these checklist items can be completed simultaneously, but it is easier to complete them without the dangers of running a cult at the same time. And buying books requires a lot of funds, which requires a lot of working, and some of those funds will be used passively over time. If you don't mind more risk, a lot of these checklist items can be completed whilst working toward a victory. But when you don't know how to attain said victory, it's difficult to attempt to do too much at once, which left me completing the checklist before attempting to ascend through the various levels of cult status, which became tedious after a few failures. Something that does help with all of the restarts is that there are different occupations in the game. When starting your first game, you will be the aspirant, a nobody with basic stats and no pre-existing prospects. If you die, when you start your next run, you will have the option to choose the physician, who starts with more health than the aspirant, and also has a stable job which can be used to earn money more reliably. These occupations really only change up the early portion of the game, as once you get past the checklist that I mentioned above, it's likely that you won't need the special cases that each occupation brings anymore. But by this point, there is enough going on in the game to keep you entertained. The mid-game will have you exploring the Mansis, which is a separate realm accessed by dreaming. You will also be expanding your cult, exploring hidden and forbidden locations to gain their riches and relics, and generally just trying to stay alive. At this midpoint, the game is very rewarding as you will unlock new books to unlock more lore and even new rituals. You will discover how to summon otherworldly creatures to do your bidding, and you are provided with a lot of freedom in enacting rituals, upgrading followers, and more. Due to the large amount of things that you are able to do, it is also harder to find the right thing to do in order to progress. I was stuck for a very long time before I was able to figure out what to do next. It's not like you'll be sitting there doing nothing, but you will spend a lot of time queuing up work and maintaining your health and sanity whilst looking for ways to ascend the Mansis and move toward the end game. I got stuck in this phase for hours upon hours, which definitely became tedious by the end. And even then, I feel like I was lucky that I figured out how to progress, as I still don't think it was clear, even after having done it. Hopefully not everyone is going to be as dense as I was, and every player may have a completely different experience when it comes to this phase of the game. Visually, Cultist Simulator is clean and tidy. There aren't going to be any monsters appearing on screen or any renders of the dark alleys that you'll send your cultists out to explore. Everything is represented by these little resource cards. There is a lot of quality writing though. Each time you place a resource in a slot and every time the timer on a verb completes, you'll be provided with some more lore or another glimpse into the world. This writing is by no means a required read, although at times there are hints and advice on what to do. If you're a fan of occult themes, you're probably going to enjoy pausing the game and reading through each little bit of text to get the most out of the game. Overall, Cultist Simulator provides a lot of enjoyment. The gameplay, despite being relatively simple looking on the outside, is very deep, and there is a lot of fun to be had experimenting with all of the different ways that the game can be completed. You are able to start a cult for each cult aspect, and once earning each of the 3 major victories, you unlock a new occupation, which allows you to go for yet another ending each. If you enjoy the basic gameplay of placing resources in verbs and completing the goals the game sets for you, you'll have a lot of fun starting different cults under different aspects. And although it doesn't change the game entirely, different cults do have different strengths, and you will need to change up strategies when completing certain objectives. Cultist Simulator has a lot to love. When completing certain actions, the board reacts, burning certain images onto the table. And, at times, when you feel like you aren't going to be able to avoid a game-ending season, out of nowhere you will be able to procure that life-saving resource to buy you a bit more time. Although not turn-based, I found myself falling into the just one more action mindset, before looking at the time and wondering where the last 2 hours went. Sure, at times the game can feel tedious and the player can feel like they lack direction, but the enjoyment far outweighs these cons. Cultist Simulator won't be for everyone, but if you like the look of what you see here and crave a different gaming experience, there's a lot to fall in love with and a great amount of content to sink your teeth into. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please like or share the video if you feel so inclined, or leave a comment and I'll get back to you.